So let me share my screen. Okay, receptive language. So last week, you guys did a good job on some of the components of therapy and kind of reflecting on your own learning style. Let's look at our receptive language. So receptive language, number one thing to always remember, and it can get confusing, especially when you're doing therapy, because they do intermingle. But a lot of times what you need to make sure is, what are you targeting with the goal? Are we targeting receptive language, or are we targeting expressive language? And this is where lots of conversations with your supervisor will likely be helpful, because chances are your client is going to have difficulties with both. So sometimes you have to refine the targets, or when you're taking data, what's the target. So so we look at kind of the developmental versus acquired. So just a quick review. Developmental disorders, so they're present from birth, or when we say developmental disorder, meaning they're delayed in some way. Do they have, I don't know, a specific disease, or I don't know, disease isn't the right word, but you know, do they have autism? Do they have something else? Typically speaking, we're looking at your average receptive language delayed person, you know, young child, we're saying it's a developmental disorder. And then acquired language is something happened that caused difficulty. So traumatic brain injury, a seizure, a stroke, something like that that occurred that caused the language issue. So there wasn't an issue before, and now there is. So acquired means now they got a language disorder somehow from something. And then developmental is, hey, they're coming along, they're just not developing at the rate. So congenital, when you hear that term, it just means born with. So when we talk about congenital disorders, a lot of times we're looking at like a syndrome, like Down syndrome's congenital, they're born with it. So, and certain things come right along with language issues also. So receptive language. Language processing is often used interchangeably with receptive language skills. So, you know, we can have a big discussion about processing in another class at another time, but looking in general, these are really kind of used interchangeably, especially with, to me, I view processing and comprehension sometimes two different ways. But your average person using these terminologies are usually meaning the same thing. So language comprehension is understanding language. The processing part is ability to attach meaning to what you're listening to. So like we can hear, we can listen to another language we don't know. We're hearing it, but we're not really attaching any meaning to it. We might even be able to repeat it, but we can't necessarily tell you what it means if we don't know the language. So a lot of times they are used interchangeably, and truly we're kind of targeting the same thing when we're working on receptive language. So,
question?
Sure, go ahead.
Does it apply to something like sign language as well, or is it just an auditory signal?
No, I think it can apply to sign language as well. Because sign language is a language.
Okay.
So it's just a visual, but you can have, as we know, there are a ton of different types of visual processing issues. So if the language is visual and you have a hard time understanding it for whatever reason, it could absolutely be just processing the language you see or hear. We typically usually say hearing.
The definition says, oh, sorry. So the definition says auditory signal, but it could be a visual signal as well.
It can be. Like I said, sign language is the only thing I would say, but yeah, but sign language I would say could come under that also for sure.
Okay, thanks.
So we look at like the top-down therapy model. So, and
Could
sometimes,
I ask another question about that? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, if processing is the auditory, would comprehension be then written or spoken language that you're
Okay,
having a hard
so
time comprehending?
from 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 us as therapists, what we're targeting usually is language comprehension. Granted, reading
Okay.
comprehension is another component. Written comprehension is another component of that. But kind of that precursor, you've got to have the understanding before you have the reading comprehension and the writing comprehension. So comprehension is kind of a standard term, but typically in the speech world, we're worried about language comprehension. So there are kids that have reading comprehension issues,
Great.
but
Thank
don't
you
have
so much.
language. Yeah, that don't have language too. So you can have comprehension problems in a variety of ways, but usually what we are targeting typically mostly is just that, that auditory comprehension piece for the most part. I would say that's kind of the stereotypical standard, but there are certain things with other kind of comprehension things that we do target in therapy. But I'm saying like your basic standard stuff, this is what we're doing. So when we look at the top-down model, we're kind of using the whole. So the Gestalt method or the whole piece. So they get the message and then usually using the knowledge and experience to kind of decipher the meaning. So kind of that top-down, we're stressing comprehension, and the focus is more on the semantic piece, not necessarily on every little detail. And then bottom up is where we go, sorry. We changed the slides around a little bit. Okay, semantics. So this is where you kind of have to get comfortable with the vocabulary we use. So semantics involves the meaning of individual words and the rules that govern the combination of the words' meanings into logical phrases. So semantics, and this is when we look at higher order language, semantics we start to see the people that have difficulty with semantics. So it's usually kind of our first step. We worry about the semantics. Do they understand what that word means? They can hear the word, they can say the word, but do they know what that word means? So we often see if somebody has semantic language issues, we're looking at reduced vocabulary, difficulties categorizing, that word retrieval. And where we see it quite a bit for us as therapists is that figurative language component. So some of that semantic stuff where the literal meaning is one thing, but the actual meaning is something completely different. Definitely, we see a lot of difficulties with our various clientele from young to old with figurative language. And even our group like our ELL. So when I say ELL, just to make sure, I feel like most people use that term, but maybe not. ELL, when I say English language learners, so they're learning language as a second language. So ELL, a lot of our ELL speakers can struggle with kind of that figurative language because it's also kind of cultural too. So morphology involves the structure of the words and that the individual word forms the basic elements. So morphology, when we're talking about morphology issues, we're looking at somebody having difficulty with plurals, verb tenses, especially the past, present, and progressive, and then possessives, like how we show in our language things belong to somebody. So definitely that morphological, and when I say morphological, I usually almost always say morphological endings because that's usually what I focus on. But even the prefix, so so that negation piece, a lot of times we have to kind of teach what means when we add that prefix to a word. But a lot of times it's the endings, the ed, the ing, irregular past tense verbs, irregular plurals. We have to kind of sometimes explicitly teach that to our clientele that struggle with language. So syntax is kind of that grammar and word order piece. And definitely we see other things like difficulties with negation, interrogatives, relative clauses. So that to me is like more, a lot of our ELA teachers also focus on that. So in a school-based setting, the ELA, English Language Arts teachers, definitely focused on the syntax part of language. It's my most, I think, unfavorite, not favorite, not my go-to part to want to address. I mean, I do, but I don't find it as particularly interesting. But receptive language disorders, here's some variety of goals. So when you read a goal like this, always kind of ask yourself, what are we targeting? So following direction skill. A lot of times we're working on, do they understand what the direction is? Understanding vocabulary, attending to a task, activity, a lesson. So attending goals. So again, you guys will get sick of listening to me say this, but poor attention skills usually kind of also we see poor receptive language skills. So there's attention, that's kind of the precursor, it's the precursor to communication. If you don't have good attention, you typically have reduced ability to communicate effectively with your surroundings and people. So attending to a task, if you see that goal, you're like, why am I as a therapist working on, will attend to an activity for 5 minutes? Because they don't even have the basic we can't get to vocab and other things until they can attend to a task together for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, listen to a task or a story, listen to something for 5, 10 minutes. So if you ever see a goal like that, the target of that goal is receptive language. So just know, because I think a lot of my SLPAs always question that goal, but it's because they don't even have the precursor to work on receptive language. We have to work on that precursor skill of attending. So memory, recall of information, understanding basic concepts. So you'll see that quite a bit. And when us as therapists refer to basic concepts, we're usually looking at those directional or preposition terms. So over, under, next to, behind, beside, below, over. So those basic prepositions, a lot of those are the basic concept words that we're targeting in our goals. And then understanding the grammatical portion of language. So definitely all of those components are important for receptive language. And here's some more. So you'll see some of these. So as an assistant, you'll be following the direction of your SLP. So again, you're never having to make up goals for your client. Your supervisor will do that. But typically what we see sometimes when we start targeting receptive language goals, hopefully you see some quick progress fast. So sometimes you have to kind of, okay, what's next? Okay, they've mastered this, what do I need to move on to? And so what we're hoping is by doing the intervention, working with them, that they're developing these skills and hopefully quickly. And that's where you might need a lot of input from your supervisor, especially with our young clientele. And then when I say our older clientele, I'm usually looking at, when I say our older clientele, meaning adults like 18 and above. Our adult population that has an acquired language, a lot of times we start at receptive language, and hopefully we see that neuroplasticity. We see the brain making connections and some of these skills coming back. So we always hope, and that's usually good prognosis from a recovery of an acquired language issue if they're making quick progress on those receptive language goals. So definitely, whether they're, regardless of the age of the client or how they got either a developmental or an acquired language disorder, we're hoping to make some good gains in receptive language. And typically speaking, and like I said, there's always exceptions to the rule, but general guidelines is you've got to have a basic level of receptive language to have expressive language skills. So it's like if you don't have the receptive language skills, a lot of times you don't have the expressive language skills. So those are very, very, very important when we're looking at progress for a client. Okay, so, and like I said, please know that a lot of times you sometimes have to question, wait, what am I targeting? Because it gets difficult when they also have expressive language difficulties. So let's do, and I'm hoping this comes up. So please somebody message me if this doesn't come up in, since last week people were having difficulties with some of the pictures. So I'm hoping this comes up for you guys. So receptive language issues, what are we seeing? So the nice thing that we see, and I kind of like the different environments it gives us. At home, at school, definitely at home, what you see, at school, what you might see. And then consistently misunderstands what is asked, said, or written. So somebody asked about writing and reading. Now, if somebody is constantly misunderstanding what they read, we do need to tease out if they have a language disorder. So it's twofold there. A lot of times we won't necessarily catch it in a verbal standpoint, but if they're constantly misunderstanding what is read, they're constantly misunderstanding, writing, we definitely have to look and see if there's a language issue. Does that make sense? Somebody asked about some of those other components. Sometimes we don't notice it till we're doing reading comprehension. But so those are things when we're looking at comprehension issues, we need to always kind of get some levels on their language. So for instance, in a school-based assessment, if somebody has concerns about reading comprehension, then we typically also make sure they don't have a language comprehension problem. So, and then we have to kind of tease it out. Is it just decoding? Can they not decode? Are they not taking their time? Are they not processing what they're reading? So it's twofold in that regard. So hopefully you guys can see this because this is just kind of a nice little visual to help you kind of think about what are we seeing in receptive language issues.
I was able to pull it up before the conference here started, but I'm not seeing it now. But I know that the link works.
It did? Okay.
Yeah.
If anybody continues to have problems, because I reposted some last week and the week before that people were having difficulties. And I don't know if it's, I think sometimes you have to use Chrome. I don't know. I don't know why it gets kind of glitchy. Let me pull one more up. Can everybody see this on Zoom right now?
Yes.
Okay. Receptive, where it says receptive. Sometimes you have to stop the share and then come back to it. But I just like it because it kind of gives you a good just summary of some of the things. And again, the other thing I like about this one is what are some other related things that we need to also be sure to rule out. If I say somebody has a receptive language issue as an SLP, they have a receptive language disorder, I need to also check, do they have a hearing impairment and a vision impairment? So somebody else has visual, and then attention disorders. So they could have all three of these things, and we still might say they have a language disorder, but we have to look at the precursor. So if somebody has a hearing impairment and all I'm doing is more auditory input, that's not really helping their language issue. I need to give them some other modalities to get the language in. So that's what I just kind of like this. These are kind of the things that we go through when we're starting to diagnose a receptive language. And then the other thing is, so children need to understand spoken language before they can use language to express themselves. So in most cases, children with a receptive language problem also have an expressive language disorder. So that's where it gets tricky sometimes as an SLPA, since you didn't do the diagnostics of teasing this out. You will have likely goals that work on receptive language and expressive language. You will likely be working on both skills, but sometimes you have to sit in a session and think of the mindset, okay, what do I need to target with this client today? What's my target for this person? And especially with acquired language disorders, that can get even sometimes more challenging than it can get with our young children, as far as, okay, they have difficulties in both areas. How am I going to target this? What are other prompts, supports do they need? So again, that's why I like this. It's just kind of a nice summary. And in my classes anyway, I try to give you guys lots of different visuals to help you guys retain some of this information. So I think sometimes it stresses people out, like, oh my gosh, I need to know everything on here. No, most of it's repetitive. It just helps you to conceptualize this in your head. And then you have some treatment. What are some things that we do? And then other symptoms of an expressive language disorder, which we will talk about next week. So gives you a preview as to what we'll talk about next. So any questions about this week, receptive language?
This isn't a question, but something that I think is cool. I work as a special ed clerk, and I share the office with our SLP. So I get to listen in to all of her sessions. And she was working with some kids today on categorizing. So she'd name 3 things and ask, these things are all. And I had the question, how do you know if you're working with a child who has just a language skill, or if it's or language deficit, or if it's a cognitive issue? And so I asked the SLP about that, and she said, you know, it can be difficult, but if they have a cognitive deficit, then they're going to have the language issues. So that's what we treat. But it just kind of goes along with some of what we're seeing here tonight. So I thought I'd share.
Yes, so very good point. So this is another piece that I think sometimes isn't always clear. If they have a cognitive impairment, you know, and when I say that, I'm meaning, you know, a mild intellectual disability, a moderate intellectual disability, they will usually 99.9% of the time have issues with language, because that's what that cognitive piece, that's a huge component of that. So yes, absolutely. Do we still work with them? Absolutely. Do we still work on functional? But we also have to be realistic in what goals we can achieve. So that might be where we look at more functional language pieces. So making sure they can communicate effectively. And that is the challenge. So what's hard about working with some of our clients with cognitive deficits, especially in acquired language, because they probably didn't have cognitive deficits before and now they do. And that's a whole new realm for them. And that's where that decision-making, problem solving comes in. What's hard is usually progress is much slower also. So progress is not as fast. So yeah, it's kind of a default of that. Okay, so I want to go over what to do this week. And so this week, we have the observation and the read and review summary, and then the receptive language quiz. So a couple different things. And I double checked this. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's there. I feel like master clinician sometimes changes on me real quick, but I checked these at the beginning of the semester. Everybody's there. So any other questions? If not, I will let you guys go tonight. But that's cool that you're the clerk and you get to see some of that in person that we talked about.
I have a question about the read and review summary.
Yes.
It's listed as a quiz again, and it
Yes.
doesn't have more than 1 attempt, but does it?
Oh, you know what? I'll fix that.
Okay.
We changed all these and it was stated as a quiz, but yes, somebody else, I did reset it. Somebody else needed me to reset it, but I'll add more attempts for you. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Get a look at the question.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. Yes, because you guys can't see.
I didn't want to click in and then be stuck.
And then be stuck for sure. Yes, I will fix that so you can reopen it.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me. Gosh, I need to go in and change those this coming up. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I appreciate you guys joining me. We're already at week 5. Oh my goodness. Wow. That's awesome. Time is flying by. All righty, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.